Bienvenidos a mi diario de Inglés Británico, un podcast para hispanohablantes que quieren entender inglés británico con confianza y progresar profesionalmente en el Reino Unido. Soy Shandon, coach nativo de inglés británico. Y sí, también hablo español. En cada episodio hablo en inglés británico real y conversacional, para que practiques tu comprensión auditiva y te acostumbres a cómo hablamos los nativos en la vida diaria. En este episodio voy a hablar de dónde vivo ahora y dónde vivía antes. Cómo son esos lugares, qué me gusta y qué no, para ayudarte a hablar de dónde vives y entender mejor el inglés. Te recomiendo que escuches este episodio más de una vez. No te preocupes si no entiendes todo. Cada vez que escuches vas a entender más. Vale, empecemos. Hi there, and welcome to episode 7 of the podcast. I hope you're well. Now I'm going to speak in English to help you practice your English listening. So let's get started. As you know, I'm British. To be more specific, I'm English. And so today, in this episode, I'm going to speak about where I live. First of all, I'm going to speak about where I lived for most of my life and give you some information about that place. Then I'm going to speak about the area I live in now and what it's like. When I do this, I'm also going to tell you what I like and what I don't like about the area I live in right now, and what I liked and didn't like about the area I used to live in. So let's go. So, I have always lived in London. I live in London now, and I've always lived here, in the capital of England, which is also one of the most famous cities in the world. I'm very, very lucky. Many people dream of coming to London to visit because it's such a famous city and such a well-known city. But I've always been here. So I believe that I'm very lucky because of that. And in some ways it's strange because for me, London is just a very normal place because I've always been here. But I understand that for a lot of people, it's an extremely special city and somewhere they dream of going to, or if they already live here, they're very fortunate and they believe themselves to be very fortunate and are very grateful to be able to live here. So let me talk about where I used to live. I've always lived in London, in this city, but I've lived in different areas of the city. Until very recently, I always lived in central London. I lived south of the river, but very close to the river, in central London. I was born in Elephant and Castle. You may know this area because Elephant and Castle is an area where lots of Spanish speakers live in London. So I lived in Elephant and Castle until I was 9 years old. I used to love going to the shopping centre there with my mum and my sister. Then, when I was 9, me and my family moved house. But we didn't move very far. We moved to a flat near Borough Market. So about a 10-minute walk from Elephant and Castle. So this is still central and south London. Again, it's south of the river, but it's still central London. And I lived there in that flat for most of the rest of my life until about 3 weeks ago. I love that area. It's what I call home and will always for me represent home because I lived there from when I was 9 years old until, as I said, 3 weeks ago. So until I was 29 years old. Some of the main things I like about that area of London. First of all, it's very easy to get to anywhere. It's a very well-connected area. If you want to get to North London, East, South, West, it's very easy. It's also very close to some of the major train stations in London. For example, London Bridge, Waterloo, and it's not far from King's Cross either. So it's very well connected. Another one is Liverpool Street. So it's easy to get to different places in London and different places in England, to be honest, as well as to get to the different airports around London. Another thing I really like about that area of London, probably my favourite thing, is that it's very close to the river. So the River Thames runs through the middle of London, and my old house, where my mum and my brothers still live now, was very close to the river. This meant I could go often to the river and walk along the river, which is probably my favourite thing to do in London. There are some great things to see. There's often music along the river, and it's just a very nice place to walk. So that's something I loved about that, living in that house. It's also close to some different parks as well, which is nice because it's always nice to be able to walk in nature, surrounded by trees, plants, greenery. It's always very nice. Of course, I mentioned this before, but it's also very near to Borough Market. This is one of London's most famous markets, and so it's nice to be able to visit that market, explore the things they have, try some of the different foods as well. The final thing I like about that area of London is that there's a huge mix of people there. There's a mix of people from different races, different nationalities. There are tourists, and there are also locals as well. And that mix of people I really like. There's one thing I don't like about the area. I mentioned that there are lots of tourists, but a problem with that area is that sometimes it's too touristy. There are too many tourists there. Of course, as I mentioned before, London is one of the most famous cities in the world. So it attracts lots of tourists. But this means that in central London, it's often too busy and it's not very peaceful. So if you want to go for a walk in central London, it's not great because it's very noisy, it's very loud, and there are too many people. So that's one thing I don't like about the area I used to live in. As I mentioned, 3 weeks ago, I moved house. And now I no longer live in South London. And I no longer live in Central London. Now I live in North London, in an area called Tottenham. This area is much less busy than where I used to live, but it's still very easy to get to Central London from here. For example, to get to my mum's house, where I used to live, it takes about 45 minutes with a bit of walking and then taking the tube or the underground. There are lots of great places to walk in this area with lots of nature. And these places are very, very calm and quiet, and I really like them. This is one of the things I like most about this area in general. The area where I live now is very quiet, very residential, and very peaceful, which I really like. Also, there's very good access to shops here. There are supermarkets all around, all of the major supermarkets, and so it's easy to go to the shops to buy groceries, food, and other things as well. However, there are some things I don't like about this area. First of all, the main thing is that I now live in North London. I never thought I'd live in North London. I thought I would always live in South London, and I always wanted to live in South London. But now I live in North London. Of course, that is a bias from me, but that's one thing I don't like. The second thing is that, of course, because it's a new area, I don't know where things are. So I don't know where certain types of shop are to buy certain things, and I don't know the area very well. I lived my whole life in more or less the same area, and so I'm very used to that area. I'm very accustomed to it, whereas now I'm in a new area. So what I need to do is explore more to understand and get to know the area a lot better. The third and final thing that I don't like about this area is that there's no river. As I mentioned before, the River Thames is my favourite place to walk in London. Here, it's too far to walk to the River Thames. I could take the tube, the underground, but it's too far to walk. And that's one thing I don't like. However, there are some canals near to where I live now, which is a good thing. Okay, so that's a bit about where I live, where I used to live, and where I live now. I hope that's been interesting and useful for improving your English listening and your English speaking. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Gracias por escuchar este episodio de mi diario de Inglés Británico. Ya has dedicado tiempo a tu aprendizaje hoy, y eso suma más de lo que crees. Poco a poco, tu inglés va a mejorar. Si vives en el Reino Unido y sientes que tu inglés te está frenando profesionalmente, te invito a hacer una evaluación de fluidez profesional gratuita conmigo. En esta sesión, analizo cómo hablas inglés hoy, identifico exactamente qué te está bloqueando y te explico qué necesitas trabajar para hablar con más claridad y confianza. No es una clase, es un diagnóstico claro y honesto de tu inglés hablado. Escríbeme por mensaje en Instagram para reservar tu evaluación. Dejo el enlace a mi cuenta en la descripción del episodio. Gracias y nos vemos pronto. Bye.